Okay, now we're going to look at trying to interpret this poem, the right word. The poem itself is really, from the title itself, we can tell there's a focus on language and using language correctly. And the first 7 stanzas attempt to describe the person sitting outside the door in the shadows, and they do it in a number of different ways. Firstly, that person outside's a terrorist. Is that the wrong description? Oh, no, they're a freedom fighter. Oh, I haven't got this right. They're a hostile militant. Oh, I wish I could. Oh, God help me. Look, they're a martyr, and I can tell this because I saw his face. They're actually a child, and not just a child, but a boy. And a boy that actually looks like your son. This evolution of the first 7 stanzas is not only an attempt to define something, it's an attempt to show that these words are very subjective and come from different political and ideological perspectives. So, for example, a terrorist is someone, by definition, who uses violence for political ends. But that's also the definition of a freedom fighter. But freedom fighter is often a more positive term used to identify someone who's fighting injustice. A hostile militant, on the other hand, is back to a negative term that implies someone who's on the opposite side of what you're doing. A guerrilla warrior is often someone who doesn't fight by making themselves clearly uniformed and visible. But a guerrilla, which is kind of small war, are people who are irregular fighters, who don't wear uniforms, who use unorthodox ways of fighting, like blowing up cars, like setting traps, like not making themselves visible when they attack. So this is also something that is ideological. When is someone a guerrilla warrior and a freedom fighter, and when are they terrorists and hostile militants? It really depends on the way you see the person. Martyrs are very popular right now. Martyrs are people who suffer religious persecution by definition. However, nowadays there are people who also identify themselves with violence for religious reasons. And in our mass media right now, the most common type of martyr is often associated with a suicide bomber, someone who bases their violent opposition to the government or other people based on their religion, and they're willing to harm others and themselves for those religious ideals. So you see, the poem is really struggling with the idea of how to identify this person, and thus perception is a major theme in the poem. The other major theme that we've already started talking about is language itself. The right word. The right word. Wrong description right away. A question here in the 4th stanza. Are words no more than wavering flags? So, the waving, words are like flags. They mean something, apparently, and they indicate something. Waving, but wavering is something a little bit different, which means changing. So maybe a word is like a flag that indicates some meaning when it's waving, but when it's wavering, that meaning also changes. Like going from terrorist to freedom fighter to militant to guerrilla warrior. Then we have this phrase, no words can help me now. Words aren't offering this speaker any help. They can't describe this person, and now that they've seen this person, when they look at them, it actually looks like a child who looks like their child, who almost looks like themselves. There's a suggestion there. And now, as we continue, the language goes to one word for you, a boy. Looks like your son, too. Language here breaks down to the point that all these terms, all these big, fearful, frightening, violent terms, terrorist, martyr, freedom fighter, guerrilla, they break down and when the speaker just sees the face of this person and then realize that they actually are a child, someone quite young. And not only that, a child like their own. Someone who, in fact, looks like themselves. And after the poem is filled with all this fear and violence and almost paranoia of what is coming, there is also a sense of hope that comes at the end of the poem. Because what happens after all this fearful waiting at the door and trying to define, the poem ends with the speaker, I open the door, come in, I say, come in and eat with us. The child steps in and carefully at my door takes off his shoes. There's an invitation here to come in. There is a sense of the taking off the shoe. I don't know if you guys are familiar. In my house, in India, my family's, we always take off our shoes when we go into the house. And it's a sense of respect. And it's something about manners, I guess. It's an inherited thing that people do. But also, some people have argued that at the end of this poem, there's also a kind of religious suggestion here. I'm going to put a question mark there because I don't know if we can really say for sure. But I know in India, but again, this poem doesn't necessarily take place in India, but also when you enter temples, the idea is to take off your shoes. In the outside world, there's all this dirt and dust. And in your home and in religious places, you take that off as a way of saying, that's something I leave at the door. And when I come into the home, it's a place of cleanliness and privacy. And I think there might be something in the poem of that, where all this fear and all this outside the door and in the shadows, there's all this fear that's projected in it. At the end, when the speaker sees the face of this boy and sees almost his own face, there comes the point where they're not these terms, these hateful, violent terms, but just a person who needs respect and hospitality and needs to come in and eat and share at the table with you. And I think the right word is a very interesting poem for that, particularly because of the ending, that hopeful, joyful ending, and that playing of language and definitions.